Hello students, good afternoon. Today I am going to say now that is the second topic, that is conduction and the propagation of the nerve impulse. So in last period I already studied you very well what is the nerve impulse and what is the nerve impulse and the different types of the neurons. So in today's our topic, I am going to say now on the topic that is what is nerve impulse, how it is generated and propagated, and there are the two kinds of the conduction and the generation of the nerve impulse. So when the nerve impulse is carried through nerve cell called a neuron. Keep in mind, when the nerve impulse is carried through nerve cell is called a neuron. Neurons are surrounded by extracellular fluid. Hence, they are the excitable. So, they have the selectively permeable membrane through which the different ions can pass. So, when neuron is in the resting state, it is not conducting any impulse. Such neuron is said to be in polarized state. Students, in first points I already explained here, when the nerve impulse is carried through the nerve cell, that is called a neuron, and neurons are covered by membrane called, this is a neurolemma. Then extracellular fluid of the neuron called as the ECM, extracellular fluid, and this neuron is covered by the neurolemma. So this neurolemma are selectively permeable membranes and through which the different ions can pass. Okay, so when neuron is in the resting state, so it is not conducting any impulse. When neuron is in the resting state, so it is not conducting any impulse. This is called a polarized state. Then when stimulus is applied there, so that polarized state to be changed into the depolarized state. Okay, so what will be happen there when neuron is in the resting state? So it is not conducting any impulse. Such neuron is said to be in polarized state. During polarized state, interior of axon is more electronegative due to less cations as compared to extracellular fluid, which is the electropositive due to more cation, and the major cations are the potassium ions and the sodium ions, okay, because inside there is a less cation as compared to extracellular fluid. So inner side is electronegative and outer side is electropositive during the polarization state. But when the membrane is permeable and there is a rapid influx of this potassium and the potassium ions, membrane is freely permeable, and when stimulus is applied, so membrane is freely permeable, resulting in rapid influx of the Na positive ion. Due to this influx, the polarity at that site is reverse. The inner side become positively charged, and this state called the depolarization. Okay, this is a polarization, polarized state, polarized. Then next one is the polarized state. This is a polarized. Then this is a depolarized, and this one is the repolarized. Means during the polarization state, inner side is electronegative, and outer side is electropositive. Okay, so when stimulus is applied here, so there is a rapid influx of this cation, that is major cation are the sodium and the potassium, positively charged sodium ion and the potassium ions, which can flow or pass from outside to inside. Means inner side is electronegative and outer side is electropositive. Inner side is electronegative and outer side is electropositive. Okay, this is a depolarization state. Then in repolarization state, what will be happen when this conduction and the propagation of nerve impulse reaches just near the axon terminal? So again change in the states, means inner side is electronegative and outer side is electropositive. This is a repolarization state, or you say this is repolarization state, or you also it is called as the polarized state. And in this way there is a conduction and the propagation of nerve impulse takes place at the axon terminal of the one neuron. But student, here this is the one neuron, and the space between the two neurons, this is the synapse. Synapse is the which regulates the intercellular communication between. In next diagram, I will show here the synapse. So what is the synapse? synapse is the region of communication or the junction between the two neurons. So there are the two types of the synapse, electrical synapse and the chemical synapse. In electrical synapse, there is a transmission of the nerve impulse takes place very fastly as compared to the chemical synapse. The nerve cell which generate, this is this is the first neuron, and second neuron. So the nerve cell which generate the impulse first it is called the presynaptic neuron, and the other, this is called the postsynaptic. This is a postsynaptic neuron, and this one is the presynaptic neuron. So the nerve cell which generate the impulse first called the presynaptic neuron, while the other, that is the postsynaptic neuron. And between these two neurons there is a 20 to 30 nanometer wide space is present here. This is called the synapse. This space called the synapse. This is a presynaptic neuron, this one is postsynaptic neuron, and this is a synapse. So it is also called the synaptic cleft, and which regulates the communication or the junction between the transmission of the nerve impulses. So in there are, I already explained, there are the two kinds of the synapse or the transmission can be classified into the two categories, electrical synapse and the chemical synapse. So in electrical synapse there is a transmission of the nerve impulse takes place very fastly as compared to the chemical synapse. In chemical synapse, neurotransmitters are involved in the transmission of the impulse, because in chemical synapse there is a this is a presynaptic membrane. This presynaptic membrane contains the synaptic knob. This is the synaptic knob. The synaptic knob contains the synaptic vesicle is filled with the neurotransmitter, and when impulse arrives or reaches the synaptic knob, so in this synaptic knob contains the synaptic vesicle, and this synaptic from that synaptic vesicle releases the neurotransmitter like the acetylcholine or the adrenaline in the synaptic cleft. And when impulse reaches here in the synaptic cleft, so which become binds with the receptors which are present on the postsynaptic membrane, or with here the ion channels are, when impulse reaches here, so ion channels are open on the postsynaptic membrane, and transmission of the nerve impulse takes place across that synapse. And then there is a release a enzyme, that is a cholinesterase, and that enzyme clean that gap, and in this way then now the presynaptic membrane or the neuron is now ready to receive the second impulse and transmit them. So in this way there are during that transmission of the impulses, there is in chemical synapse neurotransmitters such as acetylcholine or adrenaline are involved in the transmission of impulse. In a chemical synapse, presynaptic membrane has a synaptic button or bulb, synaptic cleft and postsynaptic membrane. The synaptic button has the synaptic vesicle filled with neurotransmitter like the acetylcholine. When the impulse arrives at the synaptic bulb, which stimulates the release of neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft, the released neurotransmitter stimulate the postsynaptic membrane. This binding causes the ion channels to open which are present on the postsynaptic membrane, and the entry of ion which generate the differences in the positively and negatively charged ions, and that this is called the action potential in the postsynaptic membrane. The neurotransmitter is immediately removed from that synaptic cleft by the enzyme cholinesterase, and to make it ready for the next impulse, and in this way the neural impulse is further passed through the synapse in this way. So this is the transmission of the nerve impulse. Students, I will give feedback in 1 or 2 minutes. All of you note that very well. Nerve impulse is carried through the nerve cell is called a neuron, and that neuron are surrounded by extracellular fluid. Okay, so when stimulus is applied, so that the stimulus is received by the neuron and change the state, because this neuron are covered by the membrane called a neurolemma, and this membrane is a selectively permeable membrane. This is a neurolemma. So initially there is a polarization state, then next one is there is a depolarization state, next is depolarization, first one is the polarization, next is depolarization, and third one is repolarization. So during polarization, inner side is electronegative and outer side is electropositive, because there is a less number of cations inside and more number of cations are outside. Major cations are sodium ions and the potassium ion. But when there is a stimulus applied, so this membrane become freely permeable, and rapid influx of sodium ions, positively charged sodium ion and potassium ion, and which can pass from outside to inside, and therefore inner side become electropositive and outer side become electronegative. This is the depolarization. And finally when impulse conducted here at the axon terminal, So change the state, that is depolarization state comes in the repolarization category. And this is a synapse. So these impulses are crossed through the synapse. It regulates the communication between the transmission of nerve impulses. There are mainly the two kind of the synapses, electrical synapse and the chemical synapse. In electrical synapse, transmission of nerve impulse takes place very fastly than the chemical synapse. In why called the chemical synapse? Because there is a neurotransmitter are involved in the transmission of the nerve impulses. The impulse which the neuron which carries the impulse first, this is called a presynaptic neuron. This is a presynaptic neuron which carries the impulse second. This is the postsynaptic neuron. Which between these there is a synapse is present. This is a synapse or the synaptic cleft. Synapse or the synaptic cleft. Okay. And here presynaptic membrane contains the synaptic button or the bulb. Synaptic button or bulb. Synaptic button or bulb here contain the synaptic vesicle which are filled with the neurotransmitter like the adrenaline or acetylcholine. When impulse reaches the synaptic vesicle, release a neurotransmitter in this gap, that is the synaptic cleft. And when impulse comes here, so which combined with these ion channels present here on the postsynaptic membrane, ion channels open and the next neuron is ready to receive the stimuli and carry that impulses. Means next neuron is in category of the depolarization. Okay. And then finally that gap is cleaned by the enzyme cholinesterase, and this gap is clean here, and presynaptic membrane is now ready to receive the second impulse and transmit it. So in this way there is a conduction and the transmission of the nerve impulse takes place very fastly. So students, thank you very much for this today's session. If in case of any problems and the queries, so please discuss with me in the next in group or the group chatting. So thank you very much.